Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Christine Wach, and I am the Director of Client Partnerships here at IDP Connect. I oversee North America in my role. I'm also a proud GLOED board member. So thank you for joining our collaborative session today with IDP Connect and GLOED. We are absolutely thrilled to be bringing you today's panel. A bit about GLOED to start. So Global Women in Education, or GLOED, has been created to assist women in the international education industry, both personally and professionally. We concentrate on those whose work has a global focus, either through their roles or their increased interaction with international colleagues and partners. GLOED aims to help women navigate career paths that are uniquely suited to their ambitions and life choices. And next, before we begin to introduce our panelists, we will start with a land acknowledgement. So I would like to acknowledge and recognize the Indigenous people of all the lands that we are on today. While we are meeting on a virtual platform, I want to acknowledge the importance of the lands we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and cultures. From coast to coast to coast here in Canada, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call Canada home. GLOED is grateful for the support of our sponsors today, University Canada West, Apply Board, and of course, IDP Connect Canada. With additional supports, we're very much grateful for M Squared Media, the BC Council for International Education, CBIE, the Canadian Bureau of International Education, and GUS Canada. So today's session is entitled Global State of Play, What's Next for the Student Journey and Student Support? This session is backed by popular demand after we presented part one at the CBIE conference last November 2021 virtually. So a bit of housekeeping. Feel free to ask any questions during the session, the Q&A or chat, and we will attempt to field these questions towards the end. We'll leave time. It will wrap pretty close to an hour from now, but we'll attempt to answer as many questions as possible. So with that, I'm very thrilled and excited to introduce our panelists. I will kick things off by passing the mic to Vivienne, who comes to us from the UK.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Christine. I'm Vivienne Stern and I'm the Director of Universities UK International, and that's part of the organisation that represents 140 universities in the UK. For Canadian participants here, we're a bit like Universities Canada, possibly with a tiny bit of CBIE mixed in with it.
Wonderful, thank you, Vivienne. Sarah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Mackey. I'm the Director of International Enrollment Management at Northeastern University, based in Boston, Massachusetts, and we also have campuses in Canada and the UK as well.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome. Virginia?
Hello, so glad to be here. Virginia Macchiavello, Associate VP of Transnational Strategies and Market Development. I work at Centennial College in Toronto. We're one of 24 colleges in the Ontario system. Pleased to be here and looking forward to our chat.
Thank you, Virginia. Welcome. Livia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Livia Castellanos. I'm the Executive Lead for International Education and Jurisdictional Initiatives of the Government of Saskatchewan, and I also chair the working group across provinces and territories on international education of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Livia. Okay, so the style of today's presentation is a panel. We won't have slides. It will be a discussion format like it was back in November. And with a focus on geopolitics, recruitment, and student supports, that full student journey. I think we're going to kick things off today. We're going to start with the geopolitics, as there's been some major changes since we last met in November 2021. So of course, we're at the forefront of this is the devastating and tragic war in the Ukraine, where approximately 80,000 students were studying in the Ukraine. And of course, then we have Ukrainian and Russian students studying all around the world. I'm going to start this with you, Vivienne, for a UK perspective. How is this impacting the student journey to the UK? How are we supporting these students as institutions or as an association and the government?
So, I mean, I think like everybody, we started off thinking, you know, day one of the invasion, what about Ukrainian students who are in the UK? What about are students who might be in Ukraine, so people who are on study abroad programs or who may be studying in UK universities but have gone back to visit family or been in Ukraine for some other reason. We also started thinking about Russian students and Belarusian students and what the consequences of the conflict would be for them. And as things have unfolded, that of course was everybody's first thought. How do we step in and provide support to these people who might be, you know, extremely distressed? They might be worried about family members. They might have lost access to finance. And I know universities did, you know, the sort of straightforward things. Who have we got? Where are they? Is there anybody we need to get back to safety? You know, ringing around, having one-to-one conversations with people. And then, of course, as the situation began to stabilize, stepping in with financial support, stepping in with other packages, and also doing things to make sure that Ukrainian students felt comfortable on campus, but also in many cases also trying to make sure that Russian students didn't feel vulnerable and targeted. As things have unfolded, we then started thinking, like I think many other systems, about how we could support students who might be fleeing Ukraine. So we have this huge refugee crisis now in Europe. And obviously, I think the brunt of that is being borne by countries neighbouring Ukraine. And the UK, I have to say, I mean, has been a little slow to sort out visa routes for displaced Ukrainians. It is happening, but it's been extremely slow and probably too small in scale. So many universities stepped up and did things like invest more in their refugee scholarship schemes or their schemes addressed to support Ukrainians specifically. But then, you know, going beyond that, we started to ask ourselves deeper questions, like how can we play a role in supporting Ukrainian institutions themselves? And now we've got a scheme, which I'm super proud of, where we are twinning UK universities and Ukrainian counterparts. And the focus of that effort is trying to help Ukrainian universities continue to teach their own students and to continue their academic life. And I think that's going to, in the end, be a very powerful mechanism for supporting the continued activities of the Ukrainian sector.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you, Vivienne. Virginia, did you want to speak for Canada or the institutional perspective from Canada?
Yeah, just to add to what Vivienne says, I think all institutions are looking at how to support their students and how do we transition in the new students who are coming through our governments through different pathways. Canada, of course, has created a sort of a quick pathway to Canada for a number of refugees, but the students at this point are still international students. So, and they often come without any documentation. And so we are giving conditional letters and doing testing and trying to get them started into their educational path in Canada. Vivienne, I love the idea of partnering with the Ukrainian institutions, and I think that will be a strategy going forward for many institutions as they rebuild after the war. Geopolitics is always an issue. You know, we've been through Afghanistan, Syria, now the Ukraine, and you know, the world is troubled. And so I think it's something that we all have to look at and how are we going to assist. And not only the students who are coming, because often we're dealing with privileged students, not so much from the Ukraine right now because we're bringing refugees in, but all of the economies just struck by the geopolitics and what's our accountability to deliver education internationally to help economies get started again. But Ukraine and Russia, and often the issue with Russia is a lot of help for Ukrainians, but to introduce the conversation that there are many Russian students who also are fleeing from Russia and seem to be less, there seems to be less help for the Russian students. So as an institution, we are treating both Russian and Ukrainian students the same to get them started.
Great, thank you, Virginia. Sarah, move over to the US, then we'll come back to you, Livia.
Sure. And I think I can echo kind of what Vivienne and Virginia have said. I think on the US perspective, initially there was a lot of advocacy work to get temporary protected status, TPS, granted to Ukrainian students, and that was successful. So that's a good thing on the governmental side. They acted quickly. The institutional side, everything that we can to support the safety and continuity of our current students, I think was the initial focus. And also understanding, like Virginia mentioned, the ripple effect on our current Russian students. There's quite a few Russian students studying in the United States. And I know I'm not the only one that shares concerns about the devaluation of the ruble. And if your funding is in a foreign Russian bank, your ability to make tuition payments or pay rent is hampered. And so I think institutions are still grappling with the ways they're going to be able to financially support students to ensure the continuity of their studies. In terms of moving forward and how we support students and refugees coming out of this, I echo what Virginia mentioned. I think geopolitics are always difficult. And I think we really wrestle with the role institutions play in supporting and during times of crisis like this. So I think, things like having solid emergency need-based funding, having mechanisms or policies in place for students who might not be able to get documentation to obtain their high school transcripts, and then certainly the transnational partnerships. And if you have partners, I think there's been a lot of conversation on the US side about existing partnerships with your Russian or Ukrainian counterparts, and whether those are still conducive to the university's mission and goals in light of this current crisis. So a lot of questions, I think, at this time. Most US universities have really focused on supporting the current Russian and Ukrainian students that are in place. And I think there are a lot of questions moving forward on next steps in terms of supporting incoming refugees and those transnational partnerships.
Thank you, Sarah. Livia, did you want to talk a bit about the... Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I think from the Canadian, from all the provinces and territories perspective, I think that every single province and territory in Canada has a plan. Saskatchewan particularly has a plan for Ukrainian families, Ukrainian students, Ukrainians who have been displaced. 15% of our population in the province, it is of Ukrainian descent. So it's very, very important to our government to contribute to their settlement of all of these families. Of course, we know that in Canada, they cannot claim refugee status, as Virginia mentioned, and it is just because other places in Europe are more close to Ukraine for them to become refugees there. I think what I would like to invite all our colleagues who are listening today is to really think about, the consequences and the ripple effect of the geopolitical movements in the planet. I think that right now we are in a very tense stage, and many other situations have occurred in the past. But I think that the more that this issue evolves, maybe the ripple effect will not only affect Russian students and Ukrainian students and Belarusian students, but maybe other parts of the planet when people start accommodating the pieces and who allies with who. And we need to be prepared for that. I know that universities in the province are creating different mechanisms, not only to support Ukrainian students, but to support the students who are coming from a place of war, which I think looking forward should be something that we need to be considering, just because we don't know where the next issue will occur. And we need to be prepared and support those students who are either in your institutions or about to come, in trying to move away from the issue.
Absolutely.
Christine, could I just add one thing that
Yeah.
I think, a couple of the comments that colleagues have made surfaces. I mean, Virginia talked about Afghanistan and Syria. We aren't done with those crises. I mean, it doesn't feel so long ago that we were scrabbling around trying to respond to the needs of Afghan students or people who were trying to get out of Afghanistan. And actually, I think the week after the invasion, I met with Afghan chevening scholar who was just beside himself because his family was still back in Afghanistan. And we sort of were pressing the UK government to do something about this. And suddenly the government's attention is focused on Ukraine. And in institutions in the UK, I mean, I hear frequently that there are heated campus debates about why we're paying so much attention to Ukrainians. Is it because they're white and European? And the message that I take from it isn't that we shouldn't do something to respond to Ukraine. It is that we have to stop scrabbling around trying to invent a process every time a crisis hits, because I think we're in an era of permacrisis, and that we need an infrastructure. Though I tend to sort of, maybe I'm naive, but I think Canada has a better solution than the UK, because you have a permanent mechanism for supporting displaced students, of which I'm rather jealous, actually.
Yeah, I do want to add to that, because I think that when you're looking at your infrastructure at your institution, I've recommended that they look at geopolitics and refugees and war issues as one issue, and not name it the Syrian or the Ukrainian or the African or the Afghanistan crisis, and to build that sustainable model, because it's not going away. The other thing I would like to mention, and I don't know if it's happening in the UK or the US, but as we hit these crises, the immigration offices are really overwhelmed with the processing of those applications. And so all of a sudden we've got this backlog of students from other countries and getting study permits in time to start their classes in the next semester. And when we dealt with Syria, then we got this double cohort, after they resolved the issues of that. And we're experiencing that again with the Ukraine situation, where they've shifted their resources to process, and I'm not saying they shouldn't, but they've shifted it because they don't have extra resources, and they've shifted it to process all of those documents to get the Ukrainians here. And in the meantime, the institutions are sort of stuck with this backlog of students that can't get here in time to start their process. Their visa study permit is kind of backlogged in that system. And so we're working with the government to see what we can do. I think COVID and the switch to online does allow us to deliver, a semester offshore in some cases, but not in all cases. But I think it's something that we really need to grapple with going forward, in having an infrastructure that can handle these crises.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Vivienne. Thank you all. Absolutely. I think we were already grappling with major delays from immigration offices amid COVID. So now this is just a continued, and as you said, maybe a permanent state. So speaking about sort of this movement, turning our attention now to return to travel to some areas, and for some of us, and hybrid recruitment. We wanted to talk a bit about, as we start to open up, what is travel going to look like around the world? What does travel look like now for recruitment purposes? What are some of the challenges? I'll start off very broadly, and then we can get into some of the muck of it. But what are some of the challenges and opportunities as we look to return to travel? Maybe I'll start with you, Sarah.
Sure. I think there are no shortage of challenges in the US when it comes to return to travel. Anywhere from a lot of my colleagues have slashed travel budgets. A lot of colleagues are seeing strong results with a lot of their digital marketing work. And so there's a lot of questions on whether or not travel is necessarily needed. And I think that budgetary concern is huge in the US. The State Department travel warnings, many institutions have policies where you cannot travel if there's a level 3 or level 4. I think half the world is still on level 3 or level 4 at that point. So a lot of concerns. I think we, or at least I'm viewing travel in the future as a blended approach, looking at very targeted travel in your recruitment and marketing efforts moving forward. I think in the US side, what I've noticed that's most interesting is, given the inability to travel over the last 2 years, unlike I believe my knowledge of the UK and Australia and Canada, there's been a lot of reticence in the US of using in-country representation or partnering with in-country agents to support recruitment initiatives. And just over the last 18 months, I've had a number of people send me an email saying, how do I get started in this area? And so I think there's much more openness on the US side to starting an on the ground representation and having more open-mindedness. Like, our roles are not necessarily to be jet setters. There are more efficient ways to travel and to formulate your recruitment plan moving forward. So those are just some of the challenges and trends I see in the US. I think every institution will have different strategies they employ moving forward, but the budget concern, the continued COVID fluctuations around the world, and then the question on whether or not this is the most efficient way to recruit students moving forward, I think are some of the big questions in the US right now.
Thanks, Sarah. Livia?
Thank you. I think one of the challenges that I see is that when COVID hit, we all got used to it and very comfortable to do everything online. And people are wondering and questioning, do we need to travel? Is that really necessary? Can we continue to recruit online? And I think, as Sarah mentioned, a blended approach. And when we had our last meeting during the CBIE conference, Virginia brought something that to me was brilliant. And that is, making a strategy and making a plan of what is really required in a market and when is required to travel and when is not. And I think that is something incredibly important. As you know, the government of Saskatchewan just opened 8 offices from around the world, and I'm going to be soon traveling. I have been traveling lately, but I think it's really important to define and to decide what is the market that requires your presence, what is the market that can live virtually, when do you need a senior leader to be in market, when do you not need a leader, when do you need just an in-house representative or a local representative of your institution. I think that those are the questions, and maybe now travel is not going to be as simple as it was before, in which we just put a request and said, okay, we're traveling to this fair. Maybe convincing the leaders of the institutions will be a little bit more difficult just because of safety issues, because of budget issues, and because the virtual world has really demonstrated that we can continue to recruit students. But I have a sign of caution there, where not everything needs to be virtual, because I think people still crave that human contact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that. When is it, and how can we use data? I think we've been talking a lot. How can we use data and our digital marketing efforts to inform our travel so that it's very much a part of that strategic plan? And it seems like more and more our institutional partners, and of course ourselves, need those business cases. And how do you put a business case together for face-to-face? Like, how do you define that ROI? I think that's a question a lot of people are asking. Vivienne, did you want to?
Yeah, certainly I think that that pressure to be more thoughtful about the reasons that you travel and the things that you feel would be more effective face-to-face, I think is going to grow, because if it hadn't been for COVID, we would have got there, but perhaps a little more slowly. As institutions think about their carbon footprint, and many institutions in the UK either already have or are working towards setting net zero targets. And of course, travel isn't the only contributor to carbon emissions on campuses, but it's a big issue. And since nobody wants to get into a position where they're restricting international students coming to the UK, you have to look at the kind of travel that is, institutional travel. So I think those questions are going to get sharper for people. Though Sarah's comment about US institutions having sort of changed the way they think about acquisition slightly, in a sense, we've always, I probably shouldn't admit this, Sarah, but we've always joked in the UK, we'd be really sunk if the US ever started really trying to recruit internationally, because it's, you're number one in the world, but it seems to us, that you don't try, you've got a very sort of different model for recruiting. And if you started to work in the way that, for example, Australian institutions or Canadian institutions have done, through things like local presence and agent relationships and those sorts of pathways, I think we would find in the other countries that are kind of proud to be major destinations for international students, we'd have to sharpen our game a little bit.
Well, I hate to break it to you, Vivienne, but I think given the last few years and given Canada's rise as the new #1 destination for new students, And given, quite frankly, the steep decline in Chinese students enrolling in U.S. universities, it is definitely a reckoning moment in the U.S. There are some major shifts happening within the landscape. And I think we're looking, I am very new to Northeastern University, which just see this by the numbers data just came out, and it is the #1 enroller of international students in the U.S. But I can't really speak to Northeastern, but I can say we're looking. Leadership around the U.S. campuses is looking to kind of how UK and Canadian and Australian universities have modeled their international student recruitment strategies and systems, and seeing what can be done. I think there's still some hesitancy, but the bottom line is enrollment is declining, or new student enrollment is declining, and there's definitely an understanding that we need to try harder. So
look out world, I guess. Virginia.
Yeah, just to add, I think one of the most important things is looking at the risk and the mediation of that risk. And so certainly building a global footprint, I think, is important. What can you build offshore so that you don't need to travel? I do think it's blended, because there are many fairs now that don't have a virtual option. So you either have to attend those fairs through your footprint or traveling from home to recruit. And I know we're probably all getting the questions, oh, can't we just do it virtually now? It saves us travel money. And I don't think it saves us money. I think we have to do it in a different way. And it's actually expanded our reach internationally so that we can do it better. So I do think that that's important. And I think attention to the risk of travel is really in the minds of everyone. How do we let people travel? We've now been through 9/11, through SARS, through the pandemic, and now the geopolitics. And how do you decide who travels where, and what's the process to make sure that you've done due diligence in travel? I think is a real important issue going forward.
Absolutely. Livia.
Yeah, I think, when you all were talking, I was thinking that the approach has to be very staggered. Like, we have to have a multi-pronged approach and a multi-dimensional approach to recruitment, rather than travel or not travel, but also is travel, not travel, virtual, and in-country representation. And I am just thinking about, the province of Saskatchewan in particular, where students from large centers in the planet are not really inclined to come to Saskatchewan, a 1 million people population, province. Our institutions target more perhaps secondary cities or third-tier cities, or sometimes rural areas where perhaps the students will not have access to a virtual fair. So having an in-country representation is very, very viable if you are not able to travel. So I think that different approaches at the same time and creating some sort of a global strategy or a plan will be important, in relation as well with where are the Canadian government putting the resources to approve visas and study permits, and where are the rejections being super high, so that institutions are not recruiting students in places where you have a lot of demand for students and students want to come, but at the end of the day, lots of them will not be able because the visa rejection.
Yeah, great point. And good comments here from Kath D'Amico from Trent, I believe. So creating a rubric to identify where is both a smart plan to travel versus virtual presence. So at one point they had 100% travel budget. At the other point, they had 100% digital budget, perhaps through COVID. Now we need to make budget decisions in a broader scope of reach and incorporate the hybrid approach. And as you said, taking into account, I think there's a number of factors: risk, health risk, safety and health risks. There is who should go, where should they go, what data are we using that, whether it's the visa data, the visa approval, demand data, sector data, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not quite as simple as it used to be. Okay.
I'd like to just mention too, there are a lot of platforms that have developed through COVID. IDP, I'm going to say, is one of the platforms where they've really refined that process of screening students and working more closely with institutions. And so I think, taking a look at those platforms and seeing what more can be done with social digital media that we didn't do before. And I think that's an opportunity as well.
And on that note, how do we integrate that into our current marketing and recruitment initiatives? And I think I personally, and I know a lot of leadership around the US have been overwhelmed with the rise of ed tech and just the amount of platforms available, or the amount of data available, and trying to decipher what is the right strategy, what is the right partner, what is the right platform, and then how do we incorporate all of these tools and all of this data to make data informed decisions. And I think, one of the needs that, I think we spoke about this at the last panel, but one of the needs that has come out of this is really, I think every enrollment management unit would be advised to have a data analyst on staff if it's possible. Absolutely. Just because it's most of the time too much work for IEM leadership or EM leadership to try to incorporate all of those data points. It's analysis paralysis when it comes to the amount of data we have at our fingertips right now.
Absolutely, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I don't think there's a lot of, I'm not sure about Centennial, Virginia. Centennial's got quite a robust digital recruitment team, Greg Long's team. But we did talk about it the other day, the amount of time it takes to do the research and to do data analysis and to put together a plan. It's a full-time job for institutions, I think.
Yeah, we certainly grew our social digital media team during COVID, and with the intention to continue to expand that, because it supports, whether you're traveling or not traveling, it reaches countries where you're not traveling to, and it supports the countries where you are. So I think it's critical to have a social digital media arm of your recruitment staff.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move now a bit onto supporting students. And how are we doing? This was a hot topic. How are we doing supporting students? And we're looking at a number of transitions. We talked about there's a number of probably 3 big transitions going on right now with students. So students transitioning back from their home countries to destination countries, where perhaps depending on the policy of the country, they had been studying remotely from their home country. Then we're transitioning students back to the physical classroom from online, whether that's from their home country or from their apartment in the destination country. We're also transitioning students back to careers and in-person work, to careers and co-op. And often these students, and I can speak for Canada, have not even been on shore. So it's not like they've had access to the career office, the student support office. Do they understand the Canadian, US, or UK culture of applying for jobs, doing interviews? They haven't had any of those transition supports. So I'm not sure who wants to start with this one, but how are we doing? This is a huge transition. Canada had, in one of our latest crossroad surveys that we did with students that were IDP students, Canada was rated quite low actually in student support. And I know there's been a lot of talk around student support, mental health, housing, career supports, etc. So maybe Virginia will kick it off there.
Yeah, I think this issue is one of the most critical challenges that we're going to face in the coming year or two. Students who have even graduated studying offshore and are going to land up in Canada with their postgraduate work permit, and we have to transition them into the workplace. And I don't think the federal government, nor the provincial government, nor institutions have a strong plan for that. I think we could use the newcomer process, but right now international students are not eligible for that program. And so I think we really need to look at that fairly quickly, because I think it's an issue. When it comes to mental health and isolation and supports, I think most of the public institutions have done a pretty good job of providing services virtually. And I don't see a lot of difference between domestic and international when it comes to mental health and some of those issues. And I think we're all going to see the impact of that, of COVID as students return. I also think we're going to see a demand for flexibility, which is another challenge for institutions coming out of COVID. And from an international point of view, what's the government going to allow? Before COVID, you couldn't study online in Canada. Are they going to allow a hybrid model for students to participate in, or will we have to serve them all in person, where hybrid will be a huge demand, I think, from domestic students? So there's a lot of challenges as we transition in, transition through, and transition out going forward. And I don't think we're ready. I think we really need to think about that.
Thanks, Virginia. Vivienne?
Yeah, so I mean, I agree, and I think that big question about how well we have adapted, particularly, I mean, we've got the same issue in relation to visas, sort of what is the new normal and will the visa system support that? I mean, I think in the UK that there was a colossal investment, just a colossal investment in student support, everything from mental health to you know, to sort of food parcels for people who were self-isolating during COVID. And of course, a colossal investment, as Sarah said, in EdTech in order to transition very rapidly into, and then of course to iterate, because I think the first few months were a bit of a mess for a lot of people, and they needed to sort of think about what they were going to do in the longer term. So I think for me, it feels like we've got to talk about this a lot, but I don't quite know what the sort of settled state will look like. I wonder, I mean, I think the UK does reasonably well in terms of international student and graduate perceptions about welfare and student support on campus. Where we don't do very well was an issue that you mentioned around transition to the labour market. I think the UK has historically not sort of been, I don't know, maybe sufficiently focused on that. And I think universities underinvest in international career support in the UK. And then as the proportion of the student population which comes from overseas grows, and also the dependence of UK universities on international student fee income grows, I think there needs to be a bigger investment on the transition to the labour market, because it is such an important driver of student choice.
Absolutely.
So I think that is a big issue.
Yeah, and there's been some reports published lately on Gen Z or Gen Z's sort of shift from choosing institution based on rankings to choosing institutions based on career opportunities, and in fact student support, much more attention to that flexibility of how I study, how I live, which we're also seeing in the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffling in the workplace. What's the support? It's much more almost empowered view of making choices, like not so attaching your esteem to a ranking, but rather saying really practically, what's going to best support my mental health, the way I want to live my life, how am I going to access the labor market and the economy? So making different kinds of choices. So I think, are we at risk if we're not paying attention to these various supports, whether it's mental health, flexibility of delivery, career transition and support, even competing with, you know, shorter micro type credentials? It's potentially a recruitment risk as well, I would imagine.
Yeah,
I think the challenge going forward, I think will be in matching recruitment strategies to the labor gaps in countries. You know, we tend to recruit too many students to programs where there is no career at the end because they're easy. They're easy to recruit to, and I really think we have to be more intentional about how we recruit and what we're recruiting to, what programs, where do we need them to fill the gaps, because most of the host countries are aging populations, and we have serious, critical skill gap shortages going forward, and so we really need to pay attention to those gaps as we recruit.
Absolutely. Sarah, you were going to jump in, I think.
Yeah, I think to Virginia's point, it's almost a win-win to have kind of that ROI and career opportunities be a focus as part of your institutional plan and recruitment plan. I've worked at now 2 universities that are a top 5 ranking co-op program, and I think the market is demanding that too. I think as you see a decline in Chinese student enrollment, at least in the US, the leading market will become India, and a lot of other of the emerging markets are really much more focused on ROI, career opportunities, student support services, safety than they are brand or ranking. And so being able to tell the story, tell the narrative of where your graduates are employed, what their success rate is after graduation, I think is really important from a recruitment strategy perspective. I think in the US, the biggest challenges was really the immigration structure. One of the bigger challenges is the immigration structure just does not support it in the way that Canada does. I'll just say it, it's much more challenging. We do have, OPT as a 1-year, 3-year option, depending on program. But for students with the intent of immigration, it is much more challenging to remain in the US and reach permanent residency. Now, the Biden administration is looking to make some changes to where it's much easier for PhD students to be able to obtain permanent residency, but those changes are still to be seen.
Thank you, Sarah. Livia?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is a very wholesome conversation. I think the question here between provincial governments and federal governments is who's really responsible of these students. And I'm talking about the students that have graduated abroad, have taken their entire program abroad, and now they need to be incorporated and really transitioning to the labor market. So I think there is confusion about, are the institutions responsible? Is the federal government responsible? Is the provincial government responsible? And I think it's the lack of knowledge and understanding how institutions really work. Once you have a student and when you have graduated, the student is no longer the responsibility of the institution to actually find employment to that student. And that is something that I have been speaking in the conversations that we have with several governments from across Canada. This is something that is not the responsibility of the institution. The institution takes care of the students who are really enrolled and studying at that institution with these opportunities of transition to employment and so on, but not necessarily when they have graduated. So I think, as Virginia mentioned, is going to be one of the most crucial problems that we're going to be facing. And I think that a transition like permanent residence or like newcomers is a good vehicle, especially for students who are coming from abroad directly into the labor market. I think the other thing that I would like to touch on is the labor market versus recruitment versus the study permit. And I think that we're having actually next week, we're having a whole conversation among provinces and territories and the federal government exactly on that. What is going to happen with the labor market demands of Canada versus the recruitment and versus your study permit? So if students need to be truck drivers in Canada, why are we not giving them visas to come to study being a truck driver? That is a need. We all know. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to your comments, Livia, the problem is we recruit promising them that pathway, right? So yes. My guess is they're gonna come to our door and say, "Where's my job?"
Right. And the thing is that what we're seeing in the trend is that a lot of the labor needs of the country are not really, it is resonated in the way that institutions are recruiting, but not really on the study permit that is coming into Canada, right? So we continue to accept traditionally the students who we will be traditionally accepting into the country rather than actually mapping what is the labor need in relation to the program, in relation to the study permit. So I wish that conversation happened before this panel because I will have more information, but I think it's very, very important that you all know that these conversations are happening, that data is being, there is a working group on data at the provincial territorial level where everybody's trying to figure out these things. It will be absolutely necessary. And really, I feel for all the students who will transition to Canada hoping for employment, but they will not have perhaps the proper guidance. And my other question here, and I put it for the panel, is, so what's going to happen to a student who graduated from their country in a university or in a college, let's say in Manitoba or Saskatchewan, and decides to gain employment in Ontario?
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to happen to that student, right? That's another question. That's another twist to the story that also is worrisome.
Yeah. Livia, we're going to send them to Manitoba.
Please send them to Saskatchewan. Could you send them to Saskatchewan?
Just joking. Yeah.
Well, as always,
Saskatchewan. I'm just joking, but it is a question because their work permit will be valid throughout Canada. And so, you know, how do we get them to the place where there's job opportunities, and where are they? And, you know, there's cost of living, there's all kinds of issues, very much like a newcomer. And I think we really need to take a look at this soon.
Exactly.
Well, it's always interesting, sorry, to hear the Canadian perspective, because it's such a different model within the US. I think there is some willingness to acknowledge at the back end, at graduation to OPT to H-1B and beyond, that there should be alignment between the student journey and the labor market needs. But at the front end, and I know NAFSA has done a lot of advocacy work around this, from the time a student applies for their student visa at the front end, it is a non-immigrant intent visa. So the students, even if they have the mentality of, I would love to work in the US, I would love to stay in the US someday, it is their job to convince the consular officer that they're only interested in becoming a student and then returning to their home country. And we see that as one of the #1 reasons why students are denied their visa. So even at the very beginning of the cycle in the US, there's no willingness to acknowledge that students, many of them do want to immigrate permanently and be part of the solution to the US labor market problem, but the current system does not allow that in the US. So I feel like that misalignment of labor market to student journey is even more profound in the US context than it is in the Canadian context.
Interesting. Vivienne, did you want to weigh in from the UK?
Well, I'm just looking at, there are a couple of questions that have been posted about this, including, you know, what are the opportunities? There's one from a guy called Howard Lichtman who's talking about, you know, partnering between corporates and institutions around this. And I think there must be something there. I mean, of course, universities in the UK and surely also in Canada and the US have a kind of rich network of corporate relationships, and, you know, securing work placements and opportunities for practice-based learning is very important in our system. But, you know, I do wonder whether there is more that we can do through corporate partnerships to bring people in to a program which has been co-developed with industry partners, and which is designed to provide a talent pipeline, not exclusively for that company, but for a sector which needs that sort of workforce. And to Virginia's point, we in the UK, at least, I think, because we had a period in which international student recruitment was pretty sort of stagnant, you know, institutions, I don't think they had the luxury of doing what Virginia described, which is sort of trying to craft an intake, being more sort of intentional about where you look to grow international student populations. And, you know, business and management is a sort of, I think, oversubscribed discipline for many institutions when it comes to international students. And maybe we're entering a period in the UK where, having had a kind of couple of very good years, some institutions have got a little bit more space to be a bit more intentional about where they're growing. But in the long run, if we want to, you know, I think deliver value for money for students who invest a huge amount in studying internationally, and if we want to compete with a newly, you know, a newly active US, then I think this is where we need to pay attention. It's return on investment, and it's aftercare as well.
Yeah, great term, aftercare. Absolutely. I think too, we talk about this a lot in Canada. There's a lot of, you know, we have a goal to bring in 450,000 new Canadians every year for the next X number of years. And And we have a lot of labor market gaps that we talk about consistently, but this alignment is not there. So then we have this problem where you've all talked about it, and specifically in Canada, where we have a lot of students, say, graduating with project management diplomas in one heavily populated area. But students search the known, we know that STEM programs are hot, business programs, health and medicine. But what about these, as one of you mentioned, truck driver? If we don't tell that story, and it's not for everybody, right? We have to understand the market, like be specific, segment your student market. Where are you going? What countries, what types of students are interested in this? But unless someone takes the responsibility, or we as a collective, corporate, private sector, as you said, Vivienne, government, associations, industry, tells this story, in a way it's somewhat a storytelling and recruitment, marketing and messaging problem. Because if they don't know it exists, if they only know that it's project management, post-grad pathway, or whatever that is, how can they even consider it? Livia, I see your hand.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of thinking more about a traditional model of recruitment of I am going to go out there and I'm going to promote the programs that look sexy, sound sexy, and people will come. I think institutions need to become a little bit more savvy in their partnership with government. There is a lot of provincial needs, and there are a lot of mechanisms that provinces utilize to bring cohorts of people to get trained for a very specific need in the labor market. For example, nurses, healthcare workers. I mean, there are mechanisms. So I think it is important for institutions to raise their hand and say, okay, if you need all of these things, we can partner together and I can train all the new health care workers that perhaps are needed in my jurisdiction. So it is slightly different than going to recruit and just meet people and sell your programs. It's a much more cohort model deal that it is in place. Many people know how to do it. Governments understand how to do it. And sometimes what governments don't have perhaps is the institution that will deliver the program. So I think it is important for institutions to go out there and say, okay, what's the need? What's the labor need? And how can we partner? Because IRCC plays a role, but also each jurisdiction in Canada plays a very big role in doing this. And they are the ones who manage the relationship with the federal government in order to bring a new cohort of people to get trained to get into the labor market.
Absolutely. Do you have, does anyone want to jump in on that from other country? We have a few questions. No.
We don't have, this is on the US side, I think partnering with foreign government agencies has long been a practice, but we still do not have any kind of international student mobility national strategy. I know it has been announced that the Biden administration is going to tackle that too, but as far as I know at the moment, that's just been a lot of talk. I don't know that any committees have been formed or any work has been done in that regard. So, but I do think I think 50,000 feet out, I think there's a willingness to acknowledge that traveling 6 months a year and passing out flyers in high school gyms is not the most effective means to recruit students anymore. And you have to have a multi-pronged strategy that includes partnerships, that includes digital, that may include in-country or agency collaboration. You have to kind of expand and sophisticate your recruitment strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a question here about social media, but maybe Sarah, while you're talking, we talked a bit in November just about the digital. The question is about what social media platforms, what's your strategy? In terms of your digital marketing strategy and the high-tech, high-touch approach, like at what point in the enrollment funnel and that marketing funnel is a personal touch required? At what point does digital do it best? Could you just sort of give a broad overview on some of your, maybe in your last institution, because you've only been here for 2 weeks, but how you put that together, who was responsible, how you approached it?
Sure. I'm actually speaking to some degree on this topic at NAFSA. So if you'll be at NAFSA Nationals, come to my session. But I come from the University of Cincinnati. That's where I spent the last 3 years. And we had an in-house marketing team focused solely on international and a lot of social media and digital work. It was integrated to some degree with our central marketing team. We incorporated a number of tactics. So we are IDP Connect partners, and I think from a data analysis standpoint and just a lead generation standpoint, that was a super helpful partnership. We saw a lot of return on doing Facebook and Instagram advertisements. So I feel like we have a kind of a haphazard approach, but we've tried a number of different things over the last 18 months, specifically concerning campaigns, digital campaigns around diversifications. And so we saw, I think out of the 36 countries we targeted for the last 18 months, we saw an increase in applications in 31 and an increase in enrollments in about 20 of those markets. And so data still kind of emerging, and I could check in with my Cincinnati marketing team to see how they're doing with that. But we found digital work through retargeting to be most effective, but that's on top of, you know, what is going to be a foundational, like your website has to be functional. You know, depending on how you rate your lead, like there's just so many other foundational aspects that I feel like have to come before discussing effective digital channels. You know, a functional website, a functional structure that can really handle the volume of leads, can do lead scoring, can really facilitate from a lead throughout the cycle. There's a lot of work to be done, I think, at most institutions around that. So I think starting with what is your communication strategy, do you have a functional website, and then kind of exploring what digital channels might be effective to help us with that is a good place to start. I feel like, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I feel like that was a long ramble, but I don't have a 100% answer, but I have a lot of mechanisms that I found were effective for us.
Absolutely. It's a big question, and I think that's inspiration for people to come to NAFSA and to see your session.
Much more coherent discussion when I have my slides in front of me on what we've done.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. So we're getting close to the end, unless there's anything else, any other questions, and just, we will, Megan is sharing in the chat my email and at IDP and the GlowEd email. You can reach out to us directly. So in closing, I wanted to thank the panelists and to you, all the participants, for joining us today. If you have any further questions, as I just said, you can see our email addresses in the chat. So throughout the year, GlowEd offers webinars that focus on skill building and career management for women. We would encourage you to check those out. Presentations come from thought leaders and colleagues on issues affecting international education, like we did today, and also on personal and career development. So our next session is called Women Who Stay in the Game with Julie Shapiro, and is on June 8th, 2022. So you can register. We'll be sending a follow-up email with a link to this and the registration for that link, and a link to this recording. Another plug here, so just so people know, GlowEd members can receive individual coaching. So we have a partnership with Royal Roads University on Vancouver Island, and their executive coaching program. So let us know at the GlowEd email, and if you're interested in executive coaching, we have a partnership where GlowEd members can receive coaching from their coaching graduates. They have to do a certain number of hours to get certified for free. So great partnership, great program. If you're interested, reach out and you can utilize that. We're going to send you a recording in an email after this. I'd like to thank everyone for their time. Have a lovely evening or afternoon, depending where you are, and we'll see you all again soon. Thanks so much.